You are listening to the JJS Podcast. Up to this point, the most successful companies around the world have had entire departments made up of full-time employees dedicated to providing marketing communication support, leaving every other company without those resources at a distinct disadvantage. Well, the world has changed, and we have to change with it. That's why I'm going to take my 15 years of experience of managing marketing communication strategies for some of the biggest brands in the world and share that knowledge with you so that it can improve your business and your life. So if you're a business professional or an entrepreneur who wants to learn how to deploy the right strategies given your position and the position of the audience you're trying to reach, you're in the right place. Hey guys, welcome to the JJS Podcast. So today we're going to be talking about executive communications and how important it is to bring in a consultant in order to shape up your executive communications and the advantages to that as opposed to an employee doing that. Okay, so one of the most exciting aspects of doing communications, marketing communications, is executive communications. Okay, it's one of the funnest, kind of most thrilling parts of the job. You get to work with the executive team and kind of shape the message and by extension, in a lot of ways, the culture of the organization via these executive team members and the speeches they give and the presentations they deliver and things like that. So, it's very exciting. But one of the downsides to doing this as an employee at a company is the inherent systemic power dynamic that exists between employer and employee. It's kind of unavoidable. So when you are giving an executive media coaching or helping them craft a speech or do a video and follow the script, there's a lot of back and forth that has to happen and a lot of feedback and criticism and guidance that needs to happen in order to best serve them, and make sure that they're delivering the message the best possible way, in the most strategic way. And as you can imagine, doing that with someone who's essentially your boss and who signs your checks can be challenging. So what happens oftentimes is you have to edit yourself or kind of, augment or tweak your recommendation and the way you phrase it and everything. And, invariably that undermines your ability to, give the best possible guidance to that executive that you possibly can. So that's where you want to bring in a consultant to help with that stuff, and also any other, broader, communication challenges you have at your organization. Okay, because the consultant is not bound by that dynamic. They don't have that problem. Essentially, they don't work for you. You pay a consultant who is then ethically obligated to provide the full breadth of their recommendation and their professional guidance and whatnot. So they're going to tell you how it is, essentially, and they're not worried about upsetting you. A good consultant isn't, basically. There's some consultants out there who will still kind of placate you and whatever because they want for the billable hours, but a good consultant won't be concerned with that too much. They're there to do a job, and their job is to give you the honest, full truth about anything. So if they come in and do an analysis, it's something we do at JJS. We'll come in and do an analysis for about 30 days or whatnot, and then produce a report and tell you exactly what's going on from a communication perspective, with the morale of your employees, or some of the sentiment externally or internally or whatnot. It's difficult to do that as an employee. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So when I've gone into some of these big companies, one of the things that they always want to do, or we always want to do in communications, is take a pulse, right? So we want to take a pulse of, the employees and how they're feeling, and, what their thoughts are on the organization and the executives and whatnot. And so what we'll do is we'll craft an anonymous survey and disseminate it, and then gather the results and analyze them. And the purpose of this is to make real changes and adjust accordingly based on the feedback that's been given. So, just an example, and this is something that's happened, the feedback can be, well, so-and-so keeps hiring their relatives, and they're totally incompetent and don't know what they're doing, and they have way too much responsibility, and it's damaging the team and the company. So what will happen is, in that scenario, and I've seen this, and this is in multiple places, the people on the comms team will want to soften that message, right? So they'll do this thing where they, they'll frame it as, well, we're just going to take the results and kind of sum them up in a high level, and and call out the highlights of what we found, right? And that's just a clever way of getting around delivering that harsh kind of cutting feedback that is essentially a direct indictment of an executive team member. And the reason they do that, it's not for unfounded reasons. They do that because they know, and we've experienced this firsthand, that if you deliver a message like that to an executive, what happens is you will become the target of their ire, right? It's people's instinct, especially executives who aren't really managed by anyone else, to shoot the messenger. And so if you deliver a message they don't like, they'll make it sound like it came from you, and they'll have a problem with you. And the communication people know that, and so that's what makes them soften the message and kind of tiptoe around these things. But the problem is, and then they'll take that message and they'll say, some employees express concerns with recent hiring decisions, which is nowhere near the same as saying, this person is engaging in nepotism, essentially. And so it doesn't have the same impact, same effect. And that's a disservice to the company at the end of the day. It doesn't matter who the executive is, if they're the founder or the CEO. And if they want to continue doing that and just hire incompetent relatives, that's fine. But it's your duty to deliver that message fully and tell them completely, this is what's going on, this is how they feel. But it's difficult to do that if you're the employee. You can only do that really if you're the consultant, if you're an outside party and you're not worried about getting fired or anything like that. So that's why you really want to bring in a consultant. And a good example of this going wrong was the Better.com disaster that happened with the CEO, and he fired like 900 people on a Zoom call. Okay, that was a total nightmare. And in fact, his comms people, his head comms people, like 3 of them resigned. Obviously, because if you're going to do something like that, right? I'm almost certain they advised him that if you're going to do something like that, there has to be a lot of things that need to happen before you do that, right? There needs to be a whole change management strategy laid out and approved. We need to identify the interdependencies between different projects. We need to figure out how we're going to restructure departments. We need to determine how we're going to cascade the message and whatnot. There's a whole lot of thought that needs to go into that, which obviously was completely dismissed outright. And that's what happens. And so, we have an executive do something like that, and obviously there's a public outcry, and, it could lead to someone having to be pressured into resigning. The stakes are high, especially right now. So, it'd be wise to bring in someone who can tell you the truth about what's actually going on so that you can make the best possible decisions as an executive. And, if you're not going to do that, realize that there's going to be some consequences to that. Now, in terms of what's going on now, and you can take this as a free consultation, a free recommendation for an executive in terms of executive comms. For what's going on now, there's this sentiment among communities, among executives up to this point that, and HR has been trying to prepare them almost in a way, from trying to prepare them for this moment without realizing it, by telling them you need to care about employee engagement, you need to care about morale, you need to care about, how your employees feel and whether or not they like their jobs or whatnot. And this is, you can talk about a corporate environment, or you can talk about, you're a big brand and the people on the ground in the field, if you're a big retail brand or whatever. HR people and organizational psychologists have been telling executives for years, you need to care about this stuff. And for a lot of executives, and I know this firsthand because I've heard them say this in one way or another before, and at the end of the day, their mindset was, yeah, but these people need jobs. So they're going to kind of do what we want. End of story, right? It's not really yeah, that's all nice, kind of lofty ideas and things. But at the end of the day, people aren't going to quit their job, especially if they've been there for a few years. They're not going to uproot their family and just quit and whatnot. So do I really need to care about that stuff? Really? Well, at this point, given what's going on and how you're now dealing with a population of workers who have realized, and I talked about this in my last episode, I encourage you to go back and watch or listen. They've realized that they have options. There's a whole lot of options. Someone can make money virtually, okay, without having to physically be anywhere. And that's a permanent shift. This isn't like in the past where, there was these cycles in the economy with labor. And it's like, oh, well, the economy's doing great, so the quitting is up. And when the economy's not doing so great, the quitting will go down and whatnot. There may still be some of that happens, but there's still going to be this element of the game-changing nature of what's going on. And which is the fact that people have realized, millions of them, that they don't have to work anywhere that makes them miserable or that they hate anymore. There's other options, especially if you're prepared to make a little less than you're making because you've stockpiled a lot of cash, or because you've identified multiple streams of income or whatever, or you're just willing to accept the lower standard of living in exchange for greater satisfaction or what have you. At the end of the day, you're entering a phase now where we're going to deal with a worker population that doesn't have to work somewhere they don't like anymore. And so it does matter if they like where they're working every day. They have to enjoy it every day. Okay. And the morale has to be somewhat good, or you're going to have this issue, even, and not just to be a good person. I'm just saying this from a strategic perspective. Turnover is incredibly expensive. Okay. In ways that you can, identify, in ways you really can't. It's incredibly expensive, and it can be ultimately, if it's kind of this death by 1,000 cuts, it can be destructive for your organization if you consistently have high turnover all the time, right? So you don't want to be in a situation where that's happening. So you do have to start thinking about this stuff, and you have to start reorienting your mindset and your approach in your executive communications when talking to your workers or talking to the market, because it's not going to be how it was before. This may settle on some level, as COVID kind of is finally in the rearview mirror, and we're actually kind of resuming some level of normality. But this element of people realizing at the end of the day, I can make money online. I don't really have to deal with a terrible boss or terrible culture or terrible pay or any of that stuff. This is something you're always going to have to kind of deal with going forward as an executive. It's not over. So in the interest of that, it would behoove you to bring in a consultant and tell you exactly what's going on, where the gaps are, what mistakes you're making as an organization or as an executive team, and give you that raw information so you know what to do with it. And it's going to be difficult for an employee, especially an employee who, let's say there are major gaps and the morale is low. They're not really incentivized to tell you anything useful because it's all downside for them. All that could do is potentially get them fired before they're ready to leave, if they're planning on leaving themselves, right? So there's that inherent dilemma. So I recommend that you bring a consultant, and not just for communications, just in every aspect of your business. You should definitely bring a consultant to evaluate the landscape and give you that raw truth that you need in order to improve. So take that for what you will. If you're watching, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and as always, good luck out there. Hey, I want to thank you guys for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, be sure to review and rate it so that other people who are interested in these topics can easily find it. Be sure to share it and tune in every Wednesday for a new episode of the JJS Podcast. Thanks again for listening, and remember, communication without strategy is just noise. Until next time.